Good afternoon. I'm Ethan Spessert, a first-year aerospace engineering student, and I'm going to present to you on what craft will most realistically take humans to Mars in the future. We have all seen many different interpretations of what these crafts will look like through The Martian and novels such as Red Mars, but none of them are even close to realistic. In overview, I will cover the Earth ascent to low Earth orbit, the transit from low Earth orbit to low Mars orbit, and the descent from low Mars orbit to the surface. All of these combined will be our trip to Mars. The Earth ascent will use the Space Launch System 130 metric ton evolved configuration. This has far more cargo space than its sibling, the 70 metric ton Space Launch System. It will take multiple launches to deliver the many different parts of the Mars transit vehicle into low Earth orbit. The crew will be in the Orion capsule. It has currently already undergone one successful unmanned test flight and is on schedule to be human-rated and used for manned missions by 2021 to 2023. The Orion will come into play later again in the mission. The primary habitat of the crew during their roughly 9-month voyage to Mars will be in multiple Bigelow BA-330s. This inflatable habitat is much easier to transport from Earth's surface to low Earth orbit. It has increased radiation protection and space debris protection, while also weighing less than similar-sized modules constructed like the ones on the ISS. This image displays a possible configuration of the BA-330s in order to create a large enough space for the entire crew to live and do work. It is important for mental reasons to separate living quarters and working areas for a mission this long. Humans need roughly 5 cubic meters of private space for missions this long in order to maintain healthy mental states. The interplanetary vehicle will be powered by an ion thruster. These are both quite futuristic but also unfortunately realistic. They use minimal fuel and are incredibly efficient, yet provide very little thrust. They must be left on for long periods of time in order to accelerate the craft to the needed speed. This chart is a NASA flowchart of how to recycle and reuse all air, food, and water waste. Every human excrement can be reused, not for consumption, but for radiation protection. It is vital that these systems perform perfectly because it is infeasible to bring enough air and water to last a crew of 6 for over a year without any recycling. This is an example of how the storage units and fuel tanks can be arranged in order to increase radiation protection. Most ideas of what an interplanetary vehicle would look like are long and narrow. That does not make sense because it wastes valuable physical matter that can be used as protection. This is a HIAD, hypersonic inflatable aerodynamic decelerator. It is a heat shield and a method of significantly changing the delta V of a craft when trying to establish orbit around Mars. If the ion thrusters are left on for the entire voyage, the craft will have an incredibly high velocity and will need to slow down in order to not slip out of Mars orbit. The HIAD is a far better selection than a traditional heat shield because the HIAD can be used to slow down crafts that are far wider than the Earth launch systems used. This also stops the crew from having to assemble the heat shield in space. This image shows the Curiosity sky crane. The Curiosity had to use this method because Mars' atmosphere is too thin to use parachutes for effectively slowing down to a human-rated safe landing velocity. Parachutes will be used, but the descent vehicle will need to also use rockets to slow down. The capsule shown here is the Orion capsule. This is what the crew rode in when ascending to low Earth orbit. The crew will use this to descend to the surface of Mars. It offers thermal protection and a stable enough frame to withstand the forces of descent and impact of landing. This shows the progression of the events of the mission, from the first supply missions to Mars through the return of the crew and back to Earth. The cargo missions will launch in 2037 when during an ideal Hohmann transfer. Roughly 2 years later, another good alignment of Earth and Mars for Hohmann transfer will occur. The crew will launch at that point. The journey will take 9 months. They will leave the Bigelow and their interplanetary craft in low Mars orbit during their stay on Mars. They will then use a Mars ascent vehicle to ascend from the Martian surface to rejoin their interplanetary craft in low Earth orbit.